Hey guys, Elsa the Inequality Queen, back talking to you about solving inequalities using multiplication or division. Now, here's a question. Why was Cinderella so bad at soccer? Because she kept running away from the ball. The first vocabulary term is an inequality, and that's when two statements are not equal. So you're going to have two expressions, and instead of having an equal sign in between them, you're going to have one of these symbols, and that's going to tell you which expression is less than, greater than, less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to the other one. And remember, when you're graphing these, less than and greater than are just going to be the open circles, whereas the less than or equal to and the greater than or equal to will be the closed circles. Remember, that's the key, is just look for this equal sign underneath, and if there is an equal sign underneath, you're going to shade in that circle. Let's also review how to graph inequalities. So we're going to graph this following inequality right here. So the first thing I want you to do is say it in words. X is less than 4. That gives you an idea about how we're going to graph it. Next, in order to graph it, the first thing we need to do is decide, are we going to have an open or a closed circle? Well, since there's no equal sign underneath, we know it's going to be an open circle at 4. So we go to 4 on our number line and we put an open circle. Next, we have to decide, are we shading to the left or to the right? Well, that's where the words come in. X is less than 4. We want all the numbers less than 4. So 3, 2, 1, 0. So we're going to shade to the left. And if you don't remember which way to shade, remember, you can always use our cheat code. What's the cheat code? We can just look at the inequality sign, and whichever way it's pointing, so you see this inequality sign is pointing to the left, that means we're going to shade to the left. And this only works when your variable is on the left-hand side. That's why we always move our variables to the left. Now, solving inequalities. This is a little different than solving equations, but honestly, it's very, very similar. So when solving inequalities, we simplify, move, solve, just like normal. We simplify each side if possible first, then we're going to move the variables to the left-hand side, we're going to move the constants to the right side, and then we're going to solve for the variable. Now let's talk about multiplying and dividing by a negative number. So this is where everybody messes up when solving inequalities. You need to remember, when multiplying or dividing by a negative number, you must flip the inequality sign. Whatever you need to do to remember this, store it in your brain somewhere. It's got to stay. Flip the inequality sign when you multiply or divide by a negative number. So here we have 5 minus 3x is less than or equal to 20. So we simplify, move, solve. First, can we simplify either side? No. So the next step would be to move our variables to the left. Done. Constants need to go to the right. So I start with anything added or subtracted to my variable, so that 5 has to go. Since it's positive 5, I do the opposite, the inverse. I subtract 5 from both sides. These cancel, and then 20 minus 5 gives me 15 over here. Now, to get x all by itself, I need to move all my constants to the right, so this negative 3 has to go. Since negative 3 times x, I do the opposite, the inverse. I divide both sides by negative 3. These are going to cancel each other out, and over here, 15 divided by negative 3 gives you negative 5, because one's positive and one's negative. Now, since I divided by a negative number, I must now flip my sign. So this becomes x is greater than or equal to negative 5. Part B, doing the same thing. We simplify, move, solve. So first, can we simplify this side? No. What about this side? No. So we move the next step. Move our variables to the left. Done. Constants need to go to the right. So I start with anything added or subtracted to my variable, so that minus 6 has to go to the right. So what's the opposite of minus 6? That would be plus 6. So I add 6 to both sides. That way these cancel out, and I'm left with, over here, negative 2 plus 6 is going to be positive 4. Now I have negative h over 4 is less than or equal to 4. I need to get h by itself. I need to move all my constants to the right. So this 4 and this negative sign have to go. So it's really h divided by negative 4. So what's the opposite of dividing by negative 4? I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 4. Now I'm going to change it so it looks like this, negative 4 over 1. Why do I do that? Because a lot of you guys have trouble visualizing. When you multiply this fraction right here, negative h over 4, by negative 4, it's the same thing as multiplying it by negative 4 over 1, right? This is the same thing as negative 4. Now, if you don't see that these are just going to cancel each other out, what you can do is just multiply straight across. What's 4 times h? 4h. And what's 1 times 4? 4. And since a negative times a negative makes a positive, you end up getting positive 4h over 4. Over here, this is the same thing as 4 times negative 4, which is going to be negative 16. Now, since you are multiplying both sides by a negative number, you must flip your sign. So again, this becomes positive 4h over 4. On this side, negative 16, and we had to flip our sign because we multiplied both sides by a negative number. Now, 4's cancel each other out, and I'm left with h is greater than or equal to negative 16. Again, whether you divide by a negative number or multiply both sides by a negative number, you must flip your sign. Do not forget.
Why was Cinderella bad at baseball? Because she had a pumpkin for a coach. Example time.
Example 1 says solve each inequality, graph your solution. So here we have 6x is greater than or equal to negative 30. So let's go ahead and do it. Simplify, move, solve. Can I simplify? No. Can I move my variable left? Already done. Move constants to the right. So this 6 has to go. Again, since 6 times x, I do the opposite, the inverse. I divide both sides by 6. These cancel out, and I get x is going to be greater than or equal to negative 5. You might be asking, why didn't I flip the inequality sign? It's only when you divide by a negative number. It's not when you are dividing into a negative number. We divided by a positive number, so we don't have to flip anything. Next, we need to graph it. So, in order to graph, the first thing you do is you say it in words. What do I have here? X is greater than or equal to negative 5. So now I have my graph. First thing I decide, is it going to be an open or closed circle at negative 5? Since we have this little equal sign on here, it's going to be a closed circle at negative 5. So I go to negative 5, put a closed circle. Next, I have to decide, am I going to shade to the left or the right? Well, I want all x's greater than or equal to negative 5. So what numbers would be greater than or equal to negative 5? Remember, you always think, oh, well, negative 6, negative 7, those seem greater. No, you want greater numbers, meaning more positive, which means negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to shade to the right. And when we do that, it looks something like this. Again, since we solved our inequality and we look at our variable that's on the left, we can just look at the inequality sign. It's always going to point in the direction that we should shade.
Why didn't Anna and Elsa's parents teach them the whole alphabet? Because they got lost at sea. You try.
Okay, so let's solve this. Again, simplify, move, solve. So first thing we need to do, simplify. Can I simplify? No. Next step, move our variable to the left. Well, since it's the beginning of the inequality, I could just flip this entire inequality. I'm going to put the 12p over here. I'm going to put the 100 over here, and I'm going to flip my inequality sign. So I have my variable on the left. Now I need to move my constants to the right. So this 12 has to go. Since it's 12 times p, I do the opposite, the inverse. I divide both sides by 12. That way these cancel each other out, and I get p is going to be less than 8.5. Now when I graph it, I first say it in words. P is less than 8.5. That's going to help with my shading later. Here's my graph. First thing I decide, is this an open or a closed circle? Well, I have no equal sign underneath, so I'm going to put it in an open circle at 8.5. So I go over to 8 and 9. I go right in the middle and put an open circle at 8.5. Next, do I shade to the left or the right? Well, I want all p's less than 8.5. So that means 8, 7, 6, 5. So I'm going to shade to the left of our circle. Again, since our variable's on the left, our inequality sign points in the way that we should shade. Example 2, we're doing the same thing here. We want to solve this inequality. So here, simplify, move, solve. First, can we simplify either side? No, not yet. Next, can we move our variable to the left? It's already there. Perfect. Next, we need to move our constants to the right. So this 3 and this negative sign have to go over here. Well, let's just think about it as a negative 3. So we're going to move this negative 3 to the right. Well, since we're dividing by negative 3, how do I get that to the right side? I do the opposite, the inverse. I multiply both sides by negative 3. And when I do, it's going to look something like this. I multiply by negative 3 over 1. Now, I do that because sometimes you guys get confused when you multiply a whole number to a fraction. Negative 3 is the same thing as negative 3 over 1. So what's going to happen here is now I can multiply my numerators together and my denominators together. Or you could just recognize that these are going to cancel out. And since I multiply by a negative and a negative, that's going to become positive. On this side, if you don't know how to multiply a number like this and a fraction together, what you're going to do is just make this a fraction. 2 is the same thing as 2 over 1. So you multiply the numerators together and denominators. So 2 times 3 is going to be 6. 1 times 1 is 1. And since 1 is negative and 1's positive, it becomes negative. And because I am multiplying both sides of an inequality by a negative number, anytime you multiply or divide by a negative number in an inequality, you must flip the sign. So we now have positive 3q over 3 is going to be greater than, we flip the sign, negative 6. Now what we can do is we can cancel those 3's out, and you get q is going to be greater than negative 6. Now all we have to do is graph it. First, say it in words. Q is greater than negative 6. Next, is it an open or a closed circle at negative 6? Well, since there's no equal sign under here, we're going to put an open circle at negative 6. So we go here and put an open circle. And we're going to shade which way? To the left or the right? Well, we want all Q greater than negative 6. So that's negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1. All the way to the right. So we're going to shade to the right. And again, since we solved for our variable on the left, the inequality sign points in the direction we should shade.
What kind of fairy doesn't take a bath? A stinker bell. You try.
Okay, simplify, move, solve. First, can we simplify either side? No, not yet. Next, we need to move our variables to the left. So since we're at the beginning of our inequality and there's only one variable, we just flip the whole inequality. So I'm going to put this a over 5 on the left side, this 1.5 on the right side, and I flip my inequality sign. These two things mean the same thing. Next, I need to move my constants to the right. So I have this a divided by 5. So to get that 5 to the right side, I do the opposite, the inverse. I multiply both sides by 5. Now 5 is the same thing as 5 over 1. I did this so you can see that all you're going to do is cancel these out, or if you didn't know to do that, you just multiply straight across and you get 5a over 5 is equal to, and 1.5 times 5 over 1 is the same thing as 1.5 times 5, which is 7.5. Now you see that these cancel each other out, and you get a is less than 7.5. Now when you graph it, again, say it in words. It's going to help you decide which way to shade. A is less than 7.5. So I come to my graph here. Am I going to put an open or a closed circle at 7.5? Well, since there's no equal sign under here, I'm going to put an open circle at 7.5. So I go to 7 and 8, and right between there, I put an open circle for 7.5. Next, do I shade to the left or to the right? Well, since I have all A less than 7.5, I want all the numbers less than 7.5. So that'd be 7, 6, 5, 4. So I'm going to shade to the left of my open circle. And again, since I solved for my variable on the left, my inequality points which way I should shade. Example 3 says solve each inequality, graph the solution, doing the same thing. Simplify, move, solve. So first, can I simplify either side? No, we can't divide those. So we're going to move to the next step, which is get our variable to the left. Since we're at the beginning of our inequality, we just flip our inequality. So this 2k over 3 is going to go to the left side. This 6 is going to go to the right side. And I flip my inequality sign. Sweet. Now I have my variable on the left. So my constants need to go to the right. I have two things happening here. I am multiplying k by 2, and I'm dividing that by 3. You can get rid of both of them at the same time if you just multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2 over 3 is 3 over 2. That way, these are going to cancel out and these are going to cancel out. If you didn't see that coming, you could just multiply straight across and you end up getting 6k over 6. On this side, how do I multiply a number like this with a fraction? Well, what I have to do is change this to a fraction. 6 is the same thing as 6 over 1. So 6 over 1 times 3 over 2, you multiply the numerators together and denominators together. 6 times 3 is 18. 1 times 2 is 2. So I get 18 over 2. On this side, the 6's cancel out. On this side, 18 divided by 2 is going to give you 9. So I have k is less than or equal to 9. Sweet. Now let's graph it. First, I say it in words. K is less than or equal to 9. That's going to help us shade later. Then I decide, do I have an open or a closed circle? Well, since I have an equal sign underneath, it's going to be a closed circle at 9. So I go to 9 and put a closed circle. And do I shade to the left or the right? Well, I have k is less than or equal to 9. So that's all the numbers less than or equal to 9. So I'm going to shade to the left of our closed circle. And again, since we solved for our variable on the left, our inequality sign points which way we should shade.
What kind of car does Luke Skywalker drive? A Toyota. You try.
Okay, so here, simplify, move, solve. Can we simplify this? No. What about this? No. Next, we move our variables to the left. Done. Next, constants need to go to the right. So this 4 has to go, this 7 has to go, and this negative has to go. Well, how do I do this? Well, I can make that 3 separate steps. I could get rid of the 7, then get rid of the 4, then get rid of the negative, or I could do it all at the same time. And now how do I do that? When you have a fraction like this, you can multiply both sides by the reciprocal. So here, the reciprocal of negative 4 over 7 is going to be negative 7 over 4. So I'm going to take both sides and multiply them by the reciprocal of negative 4 over 7, which is negative 7 over 4. Now, why do I do that? Because what's going to happen is I multiply this negative times negative, that becomes positive. I multiply this 7 times 4, and I get 28x. I multiply this 4 times 7, get 28. So 28x over 28 is going to cancel out. Perfect. Over here, 2 times negative 7 over 4. Again, if you don't know how to multiply a fraction by a whole number, what you do is you take this 2, make it 2 over 1. That way, you multiply the 2 times the 7 in our numerator, you get 14. Multiply the 1 times the 4 in our denominators, you get 4. And then a positive number times a negative number makes it negative. So it's going to be negative 14 over 4. But what about this sign? Remember, when you multiply both sides by a negative number, you need to flip the sign. Let's simplify. These 28s are going to cancel each other out. We just get x on this side. Over here, negative 14 over 4. You could either divide each of these by 2. To simplify it, you get negative 7 over 2. Or you could just divide it in your calculator and get negative 3.5. Now I have my inequality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph it. So the first thing I do is say it in words. What is this? Well, x is greater than or equal to negative 3.5. Perfect. That's going to help us us shade later. So the first thing I do, I decide, is it going to be an open or a closed circle at negative 3.5? Since I have this equal sign underneath, it's going to be a closed circle at negative 3.5. So I go right in between negative 3 and negative 4, and I put a closed circle. Next, am I shading to the left or the right? Since I have all x's greater than or equal to negative 3.5, that would be negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, all the numbers to the right of our given point. Now again, since we solved for our variable on the left, the inequality sign points in the direction we should shade. Example 4, doing the same thing. Simplify, move, solve. So here, we want to first simplify. Can we simplify either side? No. Next, we need to move our variable to the left. Since we're at the beginning of our inequality, we just flip our inequality. So let's go ahead and bring this guy to the left. We'll bring this guy to the right, and we'll flip our inequality sign. Sweet. Now we have our variable on the left. We need to move our constants to the right. So this 2 has to go over here, and this negative has to go over here. How do I do that? Well, I can get rid of this 2. Since we're dividing by 2, I multiply both sides by 2. And since we need to get rid of the negative 2, I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 2. So here, 2 times b is going to be 2b, 1 times 2 is going to be 2, and the negative times negative makes it positive, so it's going to be positive 2b over 2. Or you could just see that these are going to cancel each other out. On this side, 2.5 times negative 2 is going to be negative 5. Now, again, when you multiply both sides of an inequality by a negative number or divide it by a negative number, you need to flip this inequality sign. So this is going to give you positive 2b over 2 is greater than negative 5. Now, these 2's cancel each other out if you didn't know that up here, and you get b is going to be greater than negative 5. So when you're graphing, first thing we want to do is ask ourselves, how do I say it in words? It's b is greater than negative 5. Next, am I going to have an open or closed circle at negative 5? Well, since there's no equal sign right here, I'm going to put an open circle at negative 5. And am I going to shade to the left or the right? Well, since it's all b's greater than negative 5, that would be negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to shade to the right. Again, if you didn't remember that, you just look at which way the inequality sign points, since we have our variable on the left and it points to the right, so we shade to the right.
Why did Jack Sparrow have to take his mom to the movie theater? Because the movie was rated R. You try.
Okay, so again, simplify, move, solve. Can we simplify either side? No. So next, we move our variable to the left. Since we're at the beginning of our inequality, we just flip our inequality. So I'm going to take this negative 15j, put it on this side, take this 50, put it on this side, and flip our inequality sign. Sweet. Next, what I can do is I can move all my constants to the right. So this negative 15 has to go. So since it's negative 15 times j, I'm going to do the opposite, the inverse. I divide both sides by negative 15. That way these cancel out, and I get j on this side. On this side, I get 50 divided by negative 15. And since I divided both sides by a negative number, I have to flip my inequality sign. So now when we're graphing it, first thing you want to do is say it in words. What is this? J is less than negative 3.3 repeating, or negative 3 1/3. You could have also said J is less than negative 10 over 3. Same thing. Next, what we do is we put a open or closed circle at negative 3 1/3. Well, since there's no equal sign right here, it's going to be an open circle at negative 3 1/3. So we go to negative 3, and then we go a third of the way from negative 3 to negative 4, and you put an open circle. Next, do we shade to the left or the right? Well, we want all j's less than negative 3 1/3, so that would be negative 4, negative 5, negative 6. So we're going to shade to the left of negative 3 1/3. So our word problem says for a particular phone plan, text messages cost 15 cents each. If you can spend no more than $11, how many text messages can you send? Write, solve, and graph an inequality to demonstrate your solution. So word problem, step 1, we're not scared. So step 2, what is it asking us? What are we trying to find? Well, it says how many text messages can you send? So we're trying to find the number of text messages. So step 3, we define our variable. It's going to be based on what we're trying to find. How many text messages can you send? We'll say M is the number of text messages. Next, we need to write our inequality. Now, is there information in this word problem that will help us write our inequality? Well, it says text messages cost 15 cents each. So the amount of money you're going to spend is 15 cents times the number of text messages. So we have 0.15 times M, and that has to be no more than $11. So no more than means the max amount that it could be is $11. The most it could be is $11. So you have to be less than or equal to $11. So 0.15 times M, your cost, has to be less than or equal to $11. Sweet. Now we solve this inequality. So now we simplify, move, solve. First, simplify either side. Already done. Next, move my variable to the left. Done. Next, move my constants to the right. So since it's 0.15 times M, I do the opposite, the inverse. I divide by 0.15 on both sides. These cancel each other out, and I get M is less than or equal to 73.3 repeating. The question is, how many text messages can you send? So this is not your answer. You need to answer this question. How many text messages can you send? Well, it has to be less than or equal to 73 1/3. And since you can't send a third of a text message, that means that the most amount of text messages you can send would be 73. Now we need to graph this inequality as well. So in words, this is m has to be less than or equal to 73.3 repeating, or 73 and a third. So I go on my number line now, and I first decide, am I going to put an open or a closed circle at 73 and a third? Since there's an equal sign underneath, I'm going to put a closed circle there. And am I going to shade to the left or the right? Well, since it's m has to be less than or equal to 73 and a third, I have all the numbers less than 73 and a third that I need to shade in. So that would be 70, 60, 50, 40, and everything in between. So I'm going to shade to the left. And again, since we solved our inequality with our variable on the left, the inequality sign points which way we got to shade.